here.
That's my best friend. How that song
He's
go,
probably
Jay?
to this school.
That's my
He
best
sat where y'all were
friend.
sitting.
We don't know.
All right, guys, so what he was just talking about, this is what we hope our open mouth views look like. How many of them look like this?
All of
How many
mine.
of your texts say, man, let me show you, the best way to do is it gets it every time. They shoot the x-ray and they don't get it.
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh, well, that's enough. That's good enough. We'll send it that way.
They close their mouth.
She did it 8 times. But yet she
8
was not-
times.
And she wasn't happy with it. But next time she did the same one, rheumatoid on the third shot. So she said, oh, see, that was a difficult patient. She just
8 times.
Who's she?
Or you know what happens?
Burnt their skull.
I've seen where our text
man.
takes,
Their brain
X-ray,
is jello.
They can get it after a second time, so they'll send 2 images.
Well, that's okay.
They'll send 2
That's
images.
the better option than doing it 8 times.
Yeah, but she just
So
couldn't get that space.
so, let me tell y'all something real quick, guys. This is important. When you're taking images on a difficult patient, the general rule is you never want to go beyond 2 x-rays. Then you send both, and then you put your documentation that you attempted to, and these were the best images you could get. That shows at least you attempted it, even though they're less than optimal. Don't keep shooting the patient.
Or you can
That's
do a
just
few.
sloppy.
I was thinking
That's
that
sloppy.
when she can't
Do
get
the
it,
few?
why she's shooting so many.
Yes, you can. We're not even there yet, but very good.
Just
Fuchs.
Fuchs.
The Fuchs, that's one of my favorite x-rays, the Fuchs. We'll talk about that in positioning. But this is the AP open mouth, and ideally and optimally, you can see much better on the TV screens. This is what we want to see. That's the star of our show, the odontoid process. And as you guys probably know by now, what often gets in the way?
Teeth.
Those teeth. Those
Super
teeth.
bone.
And technically, per the curriculum, you should not ever send an x-ray of an open mouth without the entire odontoid tip in view. If it's obscured by teeth, you are supposed to repeat that x-ray. I'm sure you see a lot of texts say that magic word that I hate. Well, that's good enough.
Yep.
You
No,
can see
they
enough.
usually repeat them. I see a lot of them repeat these.
And as Shabeka said, the actual best option, this is what I used to do, if I shot an x-ray like this and I saw the tip was obscured by teeth, I would do a Fuchs view, and the Fuchs shows the entire odontoid through the foramen magnum. That's what you should ideally do if you're an actual good technologist. Yes, I'm saying that. Yes. But let's look at this closer, guys. This is a lot of the anatomy we just named. This is the open mouth in particular. Can you see C1 and C2 in the x-ray?
You can see only C2, right?
You can see both. Look closely.
Look on the projector.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Or the,
Yeah, you can see both.
Let's look. Here is the lateral masses of C1. There is the dens fitting up into C1.
Yeah.
There's the attachment point we just talked about. So this is an inferior articular process of C1. This is a superior articular process of C2. Now, y'all see what I'm doing there?
Yeah.
This is the inferior of 1, superior of 2. They come together to form the zygapophyseal joint of C1 and C2. So when you label these, like I said, you always have to label them in pairs. So that's where it gets a little tricky because you have the superior of C2, inferior of C1, then together the joint of C1 and C2. That's where it gets a little more advanced when it comes to labeling.
Is it 2 joints?
There's 2, yes, there's a left and a right.
Okay.
So down the entire spine, you have a left and right zygapophyseal
I was
joints.
just going to ask that, like, for the image review for the exam, are you going to say, like, the left?
Yes, I will.
Reagan,
So-
stop while your head.
I told
Please
you
stop
always
while
to
your
get
head.
a little more advanced, but we're gonna practice.
How
Yes.
come for the body you didn't put it like in the middle and you just put it like on that little corner? Is
Well,
it
this
that-
entire area is the body.
Okay, so you can put it anywhere.
It's not
there.
particularly just that one spot. This whole thing is the body.
Okay.
And then there's the superimposed bifid spinous process of C2 right there. Kind of looks like 2 little fingers
Yeah.
pointing like this. That's all you might look like 2 little fingers pointing down.
Or an
A little
arrowhead.
triangle. Or an arrowhead.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. And of course, your upper incisors, your lower incisors, you gotta get those teeth out of the way.
Majority of them don't have teeth though when they're doing.
So let me tell you, when you get a C-spine x-ray and grandma comes in with her false teeth, that's a godsend. Ask them to remove their false teeth, and you got a clear shot of that C1, C2. When you're going for a competency, look for grandma and grandpa that's missing teeth. That's your best friend.
So-
Also, fun fact, guys. Fun fact. Yeah, geriatrics. Fun fact. Patients that come in on a C-collar, Believe it or not, more often than not, I would say 9 times out of 10, a person in a C collar, their head's in the perfect position for an open mouth.
Mm-hmm.
You don't
Because
have
of
to do
the
anything but have them open their mouth, and you almost always get a clear shot because it puts it in the exact position you need it to be. So C collar's your best friend as well. Huh?
We should just put everybody in
That would help, wouldn't it? All right, so C7, guys, we should be very familiar with this particular vertebrae because we talked about that way back as X-ray babies in the first semester. We use good old C7 to palpate for our chest X-rays, which I'm sure most of you all have moved beyond that by now, and you're learning to eyeball it, yes?
Yes.
As you should be getting to that point. Very good. C7, easily palpate. We also call it the vertebral prominence. Vertebral prominence, because there's a very long prominent spinous process, and that vertebrae in particular will start looking just like the T vertebrae because we're transitioning to the T spine at that point. Make sense? So we're about to wrap up C vertebrae, and now we're going to move on to the T spine. You hanging in there? Not too much? Yes.
So what are these processes called? The side, like.
The ones that are side to side?
Well, I know they're transverse process, but what is the articulation called again? Right here.
So they're not on the actual
Intervertebral?
transverse processes, if that's what you're referring to.
This?
The transverse process is actually separate from that.
The notch I'm talking
Oh,
about.
the notch, that's
Yeah.
from the foramina coming together.
Okay.
I mean, I'm sorry, the notches are the foramina coming together.
Okay.
And I'll show you on an X-ray. It's easier to actually see on an X-ray. Little holes. That's what we see right here, guys. Speak of the devil, here we go.
Oh.
So T vertebrae, 12 in number, as y'all know, because we just went over 12 ribs. Keep that fresh, because where do the ribs attach? To the T vertebrae via 2 joints that we just reviewed called what? Oh, don't tell me I forgot those already.
The coastal.
What's connecting your ribs to the T spine? What 2 joints?
Oh,
The coastal
Costo-transverse and
And the
costo-vertebral joints. Costo-transverse links to the transverse processes. Costo-vertebral links to the body. And that's what we're looking at right here as we go down, guys. These little facets, that's where that rib's connecting. That's what you're seeing. All right, so costal facets are on the posterior and lateral sides of the bodies for articulation with the head of the ribs. And of course, the tubercle of the ribs is going to connect to those transverse processes 1 through 12. As I said, that's what I just said. Facets on the transverse processes for articulation with the tubercle of the ribs, except for what 2? 11 and 12, because those are unique. Those 2 ribs are particularly unique. Just like they don't attach the sternum, they also do not attach the transverse processes only to the vertebrae. T11 and T12 specifically. Now, if you look at that picture, guys, we can kind of see what we've been talking about. This is those typical T vertebrae we just talked about here. There's the body, transverse processes, the spinous processes. Do we see all that so far? But let's look closely at those joints again. Here's T1. This is the inferior articular process of T1, superior articular process of T2. They join together to form the zygapophyseal joint of T1 and T2. Are we seeing that? Let's look even closer. These little holes. You can see this on your little models on your desk. Each of these holes are called intervertebral foramina. They are formed by the inferior notch and the superior notch of each vertebrae. So very similar to the joints we just talked about, but now we're talking about foramina. So if I point here, this is the inferior vertebral notch of T1, superior vertebral notch of T2, to form the intervertebral foramen of T1 and T2. Y'all still following me? See how it gets more complicated? And we can follow that all the way down the spine for each of those foramina. That applies from C1 all the way down to L5, by the way. Those foramina and those zygapophyseals, same principle. It's always 2 coming together. We label them as such. And we follow that all the way down. That picture is one that we used on the last chapter, showing you that costo-transverse joint, costo-vertebral joint. Both are synovial joints, by the way. And then zygapophyseal joints, to answer someone's question, that is also a synovial joint. That is a synovial joint that allows us to be flexible. That's how we can go side to side, forward and backwards. You can move that spine around. In your model, you can see how it can move all different directions when you flex that spine.
Oh, you all right?
Fraction. So 11 and 12 are unique in that they do not have the transverse connections, only the posterior connection on the body. Yes.
You said the superior and inferior, they join together to form the intervertebral formation.
It's the notches.
The notches.
Superior and inferior notches.
Okay.
Where's the superior notch?
So superior notch, see each individual vertebrae, superior notch is on top, inferior is on the bottom.
So isn't that like weird?
It's an architecture.
If you look at it like this, here's the inferior notch, superior notch is up here,
Like by the
dips down.
pedicle?
If you look on your model, it's easier to see. It's where those nerves are poking out on the sides. All right, so guys, we already went over this. T vertebrae. This is the same as the typical vertebrae that we just discussed at the beginning of the chapter. So all these parts are the same. Whoops. Body, pedicles, lamina, transverse processes, intervertebral foramen, spinous process. That's all exactly the same, guys. The notches as well. There's the inferior notch. Superior notch is up here. Those come together to form each of those intervertebral foramen between the two vertebrae. And as we move forward, and we'll show y'all some x-rays, those are gonna really pop. You're gonna see it a lot easier. Yes?
So is it on these models? It looks like the superior process is different in the C spine than the T spine. Is that how?
Process?
But like
Or you're talking about the notch?
process or notch itself, like
They are gonna look slightly different because remember
is
the
that how
shapes are
you're able to
different.
tell? Like because one goes from sliding to just a straight up like condyle sort
That's
of shape.
another factor in telling the difference, yes. Yes.
Because that's like C7 doesn't look like that.
Mhm.
C7 has that.
C7 is unique because it's bridging the gap between C and T. So it's gonna have kind of like be a hybrid of both. Yes,
Where is the superior notch?
it's right here. It's not labeled. If you want to write that in your book, that's the superior notch right there,
Okay.
and that's the inferior. All right, let's give you a closer look right there, guys. This is not in your book. If you want to take a picture of it, I'll show you the facets where those costovertebral joints are. It's where the ribs attach, and we can really see those zygapophyseals now. This is like an oblique view of the spine. This is T10 through 12. This is L1, L2 that we're looking at. So here is, I'm going to go really slow. Pay attention. This is the inferior articular process of T10, superior articular process of T11. That is the zygapophyseal joint of T10 and T11. Y'all with me?
Start all over one more time.
All right. Oblique view,
Okay.
we're looking at here. This is T10.
Okay.
Here's the joint between T10 and 11. So, this is the inferior articular process of T10. This here is the superior articular process of T11. They join together, which is the line you see here, to form the zygapophyseal joint of T10 and T11. Making sense? If we look to the side, here's the notches. If we were looking at a true lateral, they'd look like little holes.
Yeah.
So, let's look at T11. Inferior notch of T11, superior notch of T12, come together like so, like my fingers, to form the intervertebral foramen of T11 and T12. Making sense?
Yeah.
So it's going to be very vital that we learn to count these vertebrae. Otherwise, you'll mislabel everything, as you can imagine, because it's going to be based on these numbers. So I will put on your image review, for example, give me the zygapophyseal joint of T11 and T12. You got to accurately count those vertebrae to make sure you put it in the correct spot. Or I might say, show me the superior articular process of T11. You got to make sure you're putting it on the superior process, not the inferior of 10. So that's where it starts to get a little more complicated. We got to count accurately. Do you have a question, Shamika?
No. I'm.
Oh, you're just looking at it?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
pointing to it and trying to draw it in my head.
And once again, these spaces here, that's our intervertebral disc spaces. Different from the foramen. Intervertebral disc spaces, in between each of those is a little cushion. That's our actual vertebral disc, like a little pillow between the vertebrae. That should look very familiar. You still need to know all about that because those are all connected to our T vertebrae. The head, the facet, the neck, the tubercle, the angle, the groove, the body. You know everything about that rib that should be reviewed at this point. There's where they connect once again. Just showing you those two joints, that costovertebral and costotransverse, ribs 1 through 10. We have the connection here, that's the costovertebral joint. The place it connects to the transverse process, that's the costotransverse joint. And that's the tubercle of the rib connecting to the transverse process of the vertebrae. Costovertebral is the head of the rib connecting to the body of the vertebrae. Two very important joints. We just hit those, two synovial. Remember, that's ribs 1 through 10, because 11 and 12 only connect on the vertebral bodies, not the transverse processes. Yes.
So just to clarify, the ribs connect to the basically T-spine.
Only T, yeah,
Only
T-spine.
T-spine.
Because we number them with the T-spine, 1 to 1. So one more closer look, guys. There's our typical T vertebrae. Oh, we can have fun later on this because there's not a bunch of arrows on there. I'll come back to that in a second. But there's where the rib connects via the head. That's where the rib connects via the tubercle to the transverse process. That's the costovertebral joint. That's the costotransverse joint. Once again, both are synovial. But let's have fun labeling here based on what we've learned so far. Typical T vertebrae, let's start at the top. That was labeled for you being the body. But if I point to this area right here, what is this?
The pedicle.
That's the pedicles. What are these on the sides?
Transverse process.
Transverse processes. What about this area here?
Lamina.
The laminae, plural. Down here is labeled for you, that's the spinous process. And what's in the middle?
Vertebral foramen.
That's the
Canal.
vertebral foramen. Not to be confused with the intervertebral foramen. We're just going straight down where the spinal cord is, that's the vertebral foramen. Good. Let's just show you one more close look there, guys, going through T1 down to T12. Show you how you connect posteriorly. See there's like apophyseal joints once again from the back side here. By the way, just for fun, what zygapophyseal joint is this? See if you can count.
3.
Four.
That's the zygapophyseal joint of T3 and T4. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4. Thus, that's the zygapophyseal joint of 3 and 4. 3 and 4.
And that's their left side?
This would be the patient's left side, yes. Oh Lord.
That left and right, that's.
One more
Yeah,
closer look.
it switches again.
You don't gotta get those left and rights down, guys. That's what trips most people up.
Switches again.
Is there an oblique view there, guys? If you want to take another picture of that, that's not in your book. That's just T10 to 12. Same picture we just looked at, just removing the L vertebrae. Just showing you another view of those foramina, those like apophyseals, and all the little parts in between. Guys, I cannot specify enough. The registry loves the spinal stuff. So we've got to make sure we master all this. Why is it so complicated? That's why they're going to fall in love with it. We're only doing TNC right now. L spine is going to be the next chapter. Or the next section. It's in the same chapter, the next section.
No.
All right, that's showing you one of those disc spaces, by the way, guys. If you were to cut the spine in half with everything in place, there's the body in between, there's that cushion. That's your vertebral disc. So the disc has two parts, as y'all learned last Wednesday. The outer edge is the annulus fibrosus. The middle is the nucleus pulposus. This would be a cross-sectional view looking down at it. Nucleus pulposus surrounded by annulus fibrosus. There's where your spinal cord is. So, when people say they slip a disc, what's happening? This pulposus is herniating backwards or forwards, depending, it can go both directions. Obviously more dangerous if it herniates backwards. Why? Because it's going to compress the spinal cord. Cut it off, almost like kind of cutting off a water line when you squeeze it together, which can cause issues for the patient, obviously. So remember those two words once again. You're going to see that again. Annulus fibrosus and nucleus pulposus. Each disc is made of two parts. Those are found in between the bodies, not actually in the body, in between the bodies of the vertebrae. It's like a pillow. Cushy stuff. Huh?
Why do we need to know that?
Why?
Yeah.
They consider it important. I mean, you know, once again, you go into MRI, you're going to see this all the time. This This would be an MRI exam to check that stuff. Just get you prepared for advanced realities. All right, so here we go, guys. Let's look at actual X-ray image. We have a lateral C-spine, of which we can name a lot of stuff on this image. How much time do I have? You got time for this? Okay. We've got to learn to count the vertebrae. So, I start at the top. What's the first one I see? Well, that's good old C1. So let's count. We got C1, C2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7's being cut off down here. By the way, that's a big no-no in a lateral C-spine. You need at least C7 and T1 on those images. I'm sure Tex have told you that. But let's look at the parts. If I am referring to this right here, what is that?
Which body? The body of C3.
The body of what?
C3.
The body of C3.
The body of C3. Does everyone see that?
Yes.
Does everyone see the body of C3?
Yeah.
Yes. What is this arrow pointing to?
The Z
That's
joint.
the-
Zygosphere joint.
That would be the zygapophyseal joint of C3 and C4. So if I point to this one, what would it be?
C2, C3.
Zygapophyseal joint of C2 and C3. If I jump down here, what is this? Zygapophyseal of C6 and C7. Is that making sense so far? Let's look even more close. See these little two arrows? They're pointing to individual portions of the vertebrae. So this would be inferior articular process of C5, superior articular process of C6. You see how it has them labeled in twos right there?
How are we
Yes,
counting again? I'm sorry, I know.
1, 2,
I thought
3,
one didn't
4,
have a-
5, 6, 7.
I thought one didn't have a spine going backwards.
It barely shows up. Okay, it doesn't have a prominent one, but it's still on a lateral list. It barely shows up. Yeah, and T7. I'm sorry, not T7, but C7. I wish I could see it on this image. It's gonna be very long, like you see right here. It's cut off. That's if that works for you. Count backwards. Look for that very long spinous process and those 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Where's the one above?
Yeah, I know, but like, isn't this?
Yes.
The arrows are, can you see the labeling again for the arrows?
For the what?
The arrows.
Zygapophyseal.
No, the black
Not
ones.
that, but
No,
like,
no,
This would be
isn't
the
C6
inferior articular
a
process
lot
of
longer?
That's what I'm
C5,
saying.
superior articular
The one with
process
two
of
arrows,
C6.
less one.
Right here.
It's even longer than that?
So yeah, Jay, it does look like, I see what you're saying, but on a lateral view for C1, it is gonna look slightly prominent like that. This is C2 with the donatoid process coming up right here, which you can barely see.
Okay.
It's notching into C1. So the reason we say it doesn't have a spinous process, if you look closely, see how much further these are coming out in comparison, kind of pointed,
Mm-hmm.
versus this is like flat, almost like it's been cut off. So don't be deceived by that. It's still only C1. And
Yes,
that's
sir.
where the occipital bone is connected to it right there. Let's see, what else can we name? Make sure you don't forget your soft tissue anatomy, by the way. If you see an air-filled structure right here, it's gonna be that air-filled trachea. There's also a little bone that floats in the front here that we sometimes see. What was that called? Hyoid bone. And then of course we have our mandible. We don't know all the parts of the mandible yet, but do know that is your mandible. And do know this is your occipital bone. That's
It's
the
not
one
super
skull
close.
structure I need you to know for now, is the occipital bone and the mandible.
Which,
Yes.
which position exactly, sir?
I'm sorry,
Occipital bone, the whole of that skull?
what's your
The
question? sir?
occipital bone, is the whole of that white stuff on top, sir?
The whole of what?
Whole
Isn't
of
that
that
whole skull?
whole
Or
skull?
just saying is
Are you
It's
saying
like,
is
where's
this all
it, I
skull?
think?
Yeah,
This
all
is all
that
skull,
see-
yes. This is all skull. This portion in particular is the occipital bone. It's connected to the vertebrae. Now, I'm not gonna have y'all name this other stuff yet, that's coming into head work, but for now, because it is connecting to C1, we're gonna go ahead and name the occipital bone in particular. That's the part that's on your models, yes.
Like that far.
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Donahue?
Emily, you okay? Too much for you?
So, if this is the mastoid tip, this is TMJ, or what is this down here?
So that's not the mastoid tip. It's not the mastoid tip.
This one here, the one that goes by your EEM, or
That is not the mastoid tip. No. Mastoid tip is more posterior, behind your ear. So if you palpate behind your ear,
Yeah.
right here, that's your mastoid tips.
Okay.
That's like when you
So
open
then
your jaw, you can feel it.
that's the lower
That
process.
would be actually
Yeah.
hidden, superimposed, you can't really see it.
Okay.
And to answer your question, Jay, that's the gonion.
Going
To
on.
go here.
Okay.
The gonion.
It's like what, see?
Cause you do open mouth, open and closed.
I'm gonna stop there today, guys. I can see y'all are worn out. By the way, this is gonna be a view where we can start seeing those parameters. You'll see the holes.
Oh, yeah.
We'll start reviewing these x-rays on Monday. I'll also have some practice images for you that I will send. We'll start mastering this anatomy. It's gonna be very essential that we master this moving forward because they are gonna ask you quite a bit of questions on the registry in regards to stuff. Good questions so far.
Yes.
Yes.
Why are the left and the right different?
Why are the left and right different?
Yeah, that left lateral and then the right one on the next picture is
Cause that's the RPO,
the same thing.
the next picture.
Now you gotta do
Is that
it.
next picture lateral or not?
Oh, this
It's
one?
an oblique.
This is an oblique.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
Yeah,
these are oblique
yeah, that's
too?
why I'm stopping now because it's gonna get a lot more complex than the obliques. We'll start back here, we'll review this image, and we'll move on to the obliques.
What?
Yes?
Yep.
You don't like it?
That Z joint is,
The what?
that Z joint.
I see what you've done.
You don't like it?
Can you point at it like on
What's wrong?
C7 and between C7 and, I'm sorry,
You okay?
C6 and C7?
Right here.
I'll tell you.
Oh, it'd be there, it wouldn't be over, next,
Is it
like on your more right side.
Nope,
You got
this is the
upstairs?
foramen, just so you know.
Upset how good this shit is. I'm not going down alone.
No, I said, did you get upstairs?
So guys, what I would like you to do, please start familiarizing yourself with this anatomy. Like, you don't have to study too much, rest this weekend, but start getting familiar with the terms because it's x-rays with the various views. You're gonna see next week there are a lot of views this chapter, a lot of positions.
It is good.
The anatomy is quite complex.
Cody,
You
put
gotta
us
know
on.
what view you're looking
Cody,
at,
put
what
us on.
side you're looking at, all the above. So start familiarizing yourself
Put
with
'em on.
anatomical
Is that-
terms, because it's
Only time
gonna,
I've
the
heard
intensity is gonna
cuts.
increase on Monday, just to tell you. So we'll end there today, guys. Like I said, be looking for some practice images coming your way. I'll try to get that sent out today, and I'll send the information on the fun run, where to go tomorrow on that as well. Any more questions?
Right.
All right, guys, I will see y'all at 2 o'clock.